Today I thought we'd start with being aware of the voices, being aware of your own split personality, your own. Most of us have two voices. There's obviously the inner critic. I'm sure you know all about that one. And before we go anywhere with these voices, those of you who may be of a more spiritual aspiration would be more interested in actually silencing the voices rather than having them work for you. And that's probably a completely different video, maybe. But while we're here, it's really quite simple. You simply stop the internal dialoguing in the same way you stop the external dialoguing. See? But let us move on to, I'm sure you're all really aware of your inner critic. Most of us have a critic. Now your inner critic just loves to talk, and it warns you of all the awful consequences of of what you're doing. It speaks normally from your past, and it selectively recalls the things that went wrong for you. The time you failed an exam, or when you only got that one date with whom you thought was the love of your life, or when you were made redundant, perhaps. So, in a way, your inner critic wants something, is there to help you, believe it or not. It wants to wrap your present moment in cotton wool and to persuade you to take as little action as possible, just so you don't trip. At the same time, all of those negative conversations that you have with the inner critic can make you feel miserable and stifled. And that's actually not the worst of it. Your inner critic is quite prepared to use nasty tactics to hold you back from living out your dangerous dreams, because it distorts. It stretches reality and only allows you to focus on what you can't do, on what you can't be, or what you think you can't do or can't be. It's certainly not afraid to speak its mind. I'm sure you find that this is the case. It's that voice that tells you you're not good enough. You're too fat and too stupid. I'm sure you all know of that voice. But the good news, as far as this goes, is that we also have a voice that's like an inner teacher, an inner coach, if you like, one that cheers you on, encourages you to have a go, and celebrates all the process. And this inner coach tends to speak from your future. It's that version of you that knows how it's all going to turn out, and is really just bursting to tell you that everything's going to be fine. And yes, you've had some challenges along the way, and maybe there have been periods when you felt deeply frustrated or even depressed, unhappy. But the coach looks back, the inner coach looks back along your life, and whereas the inner critic sees everything that you did wrong, the inner coach sees what there is to celebrate, sees lots of fun, lots of growth, lots of happiness, love. And even when it looks back, even at those catastrophes, it says that generally they turned out to be blessings in disguise. Maybe that getting laid off of work enabled you to make a change where you discovered what you were meant to be doing, your true calling. So its job, your inner coach, is to encourage you to create a wonderful future for yourself by taking positive action in the present moment. Your coach, as opposed to your critic, wants to tell you you can trust yourself. Because as long as you take positive action, everything's going to be okay. And while I'm mentioning this, just listening and watching in a very passive way will give you mental information but won't necessarily cause you to make positive change in your life. And so I would recommend that you get a notebook and a pen, or even better, quite honestly, would be to find a journal or a diary of some sort, because I'm going to give you some things to do, really just to get clear with yourself, so that you can work out how to deal with any false steps, so that instead of feeling miserable and under the control of that inner critic, you can feel free, energized, able to breathe in the fresh air, and looking forward to your next adventure. Now, I know that most of us don't hear the voice of the inner coach very often because your inner critic is so loud, persistent, and ever-present. Even when you do hear your inner coach, your inner critic comes in straight away and slaps it down and says maybe you're being unrealistic or self-indulgent. Now, keep in mind that your inner critic does want something positive for you, and that they're really fantastic at their jobs. It's just the way they go about it, saying that worry, cynicism and doubt are the only real things to be guided by, and that any optimism you might accrue, any self-belief, are delusions. But remember that both voices come from you. Both perspectives have value in the right proportions. Sometimes your inner critic might point out something useful that you do need to take account of. And they often start with a grain of truth, your inner critic, and sort of lure you into a dialogue where they can go into the full guilt trip. And it's sort of interesting to perhaps close your eyes for a moment and see if you can recognize the voice of your inner critic. Is it somebody you know? Now, you may not know that your inner teacher, your inner coach, has a voice that you can trust, because we tend to let the critic fly the plane. We tend to let the critic run on autopilot, and the inner coach doesn't really get much of a look in. In fact, you can get much better results in your life if you switch roles, if you switch their roles, so that the inner coach is the pilot or the captain of the plane, and that the critic supports and is like a co-pilot, but only under strict supervision of the inner coach.